The Failed Shows of NBC. Father of the Pride. This show was a bit of a financial risk to say the least, with each episode costing at least over $2 million to produce. Although the show was based in Las Vegas, luck wasn't on their side. This show was a computer-animated sitcom created by Jeffrey Katzenberg of DreamWorks about a family of white lions and their experiences as part of Siegfried and Roy's popular Las Vegas show. On paper, it seemed like cash money, but the high cost of production, the PTC filing complaints, and very mild ratings proved to be too much for Father of the Pride to survive, and thus only lasted just shy of one complete season. The severe injuries to Roy Horn in 2003 almost caused the entire project to be scrapped, but Siegfried and Roy loved the idea and insisted that the show proceed as planned. Manimal. Glenn A. Larson is one of the most legendary creators in television history, bringing us shows like The Fall Guy, Magnum P.I., Battlestar Galactica, and one of my personal favorites, Knight Rider. He also brought us Manimal. Manimal is about a crime-fighting shapeshifter who could turn into an animal in an effort to solve that episode's conflict. That's the show. It aired opposite of Dallas, so it pretty much never stood a snowball's chance in hell of surviving. Although Manimal seems to have a cult following today, it was still cancelled after only 8 episodes, with the last 3 delayed until the end of the fall schedule for their premieres. Assuming there was enough demand for it, Manimal was released on DVD in its entirety in 2015 in the United States. A Little Late with Lily Singh. The most recent entry on this list, the Extra Late Night Show, was an experiment in mainstreaming YouTubers that may not have gone quite as well as hoped. Lily Singh is a professional YouTuber who was tapped to replace the 18-years-old Last Call with Carson Daly. The 2019 show would be in the unique 1:35 a.m. slot on NBC, a slot that had no competition from ABC or CBS. The program started as a traditional talk show, but then Singh immediately went into an impassioned monologue focusing on her being a bisexual woman of color. It was funny enough, but then it devolved into a bizarre tirade. Since one doesn't get a second chance to make a first impression, the show struggled to find its identity. By season 2, A Little Late went from a conventional talk show to more of an informal interview show taped in a house. The change of scenery wasn't quite enough to keep the show afloat, and NBC's desire to run a third talk show was essentially dissolved in late spring 2021. Super Train. This was a show that took place on a nuclear-powered bullet train with many of the same amenities one would find on a cruise ship. Hence, the show is about the train's journey from one town to the next while the train's passengers tell their story. Similar to The Love Boat, however, these stories were awful, ranging from several various kidnapping plots, murder-for-hire schemes, and hostage situations. Lasting just 9 episodes, NBC dubbed Super Train too expensive, and the ratings weren't high enough to justify that expense. The Michael Richards Show. Cosmo Kramer was a beloved character on Seinfeld that fans just couldn't get enough of. So NBC greenlit a new sitcom starring the actor Michael Richards in 2000 playing a clumsy private investigator, very similar to a few of his previous roles. Although supposedly Richards wanted to get away from the character, he was allegedly persuaded by the network to keep the clumsiness going. The show's promos really made this look like a continuation of Kramer. Although the first episode earned over 12 million viewers, by week 2 the show lost a quarter of its entire audience and it just kept tanking from there. After only 8 episodes, that would be it for the very creatively named Michael Richards Show. Kristen. If there was anything the late 90s NBC had no shortage of, was single girl in the big city sitcoms, including Caroline in the City, The Naked Truth, and Veronica's Closet. Kristen was no exception, except this was much less successful. Broadway legend Kristen Chenoweth plays an Oklahoma secretary named Kristen who moves to New York City to make it as an actress. So kind of like the classic series That Girl, except maybe 40 years later and without the shock value of being one of the first TV shows to feature a strong unmarried female lead. Kristen received mixed reactions from viewers, and that's putting it lightly. Out of the 13 episodes produced, only 6 of them aired. Ironside. Ironside was a remake of the 1960s and 1970s series starring Raymond Burr as the paralyzed detective confined to a wheelchair. The remake starred Blair Underwood in the lead role and had a much grittier feel than the original. However, the show was lambasted by audiences and critics, and also received backlash for not considering casting a disabled actor in the lead role. The show only aired 4 episodes before being canceled, with its time on NBC lasting just under 1 month. The Richard Pryor Show. By 1977, Richard Pryor already had a reputation for being an incredibly outspoken, controversial, and downright uncomfortable comedian. He hosted Saturday Night Live the year prior, the first of very few times to run on a 7-second delay in the event something had to be censored. Not to mention his album names, which I will not say out loud. NBC still gave him this show considering the risk. Only 4 episodes ever existed. In 1977, terrestrial primetime was still very family-friendly in nature, so having this show air during its peak time opposite Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley was a very curious decision by NBC. If the show happened today, it could have had a solid home on Peacock or any of the corporate giants' various cable channels. It is definitely a show that was cursed for being way too far ahead of its time. Quarter Life. Another example of a wildly popular internet series that was picked up by a mainstream network, Quarter Life was greenlit by NBC and premiered in 2008. The show, which was essentially about internet meets life, was up against a 2008 primary presidential debate. It was watched by 3.1 million people and failed miserably in the show's target demographic, losing to Bad Girls Club on Oxygen. The show was canceled immediately thereafter, but the remaining 5 episodes were eventually shown on Bravo, so at least anyone who still loved the series got a chance to finish it out. Rosie Live. Rosie O'Donnell was a somewhat popular comedian who later became a wildly successful talk show host in the late 1990s. When that ran its course, she achieved new fame in the mid-2000s by replacing Meredith Vieira as the lead host or moderator of ABC's The View, giving the show's 10th season a much more political edge, and thus raising its ratings by a resounding 27%. But Rosie's presence on the show was controversial at best and wildly insane at worst. By May 2007, she was gone thanks to the use of a split screen to enhance one of her many debates. Within just a few months, Rosie kicked off a new era of television where political opinion and debating reigned supreme. Yet after all that, NBC greenlit a classic-style variety show for O'Donnell in 2008. However, unlike the equally unsuccessful Osbourne's Reloaded, which aired 1 partial episode on Fox a few months later, Rosie Live did manage to get through 1 episode before NBC decided that this pilot special would remain just that, and nothing more. Although 5 million people did watch this episode, it received widespread negative reviews from critics and audiences and stands at a dismal 2.2 out of 10 on IMDb. My name is Mark, and I make television nostalgia content of all varieties. If you love what you see, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Also, did I leave off any failed NBC shows you'd like to see mentioned in a future update? Leave an excellent comment below. These shows failed, but if you are curious of several celebrities who threw away their careers in just a couple of seconds, click here.